The Romans now have established themselves as a significant expansionistic empire in the area that you know as modern-day Italy. They have been able to incorporate many of the city-states around them, defeating enemies consistently, sometimes fully incorporating them into citizenship in Rome and all the protections of Rome and its laws. And in various places, different groups of people were treated differently legally, but in all cases, Rome decided that when they conquered an area, they always had control over the situation there, and including adding soldiers from that area into the Roman military structure. But as Rome expanded outwards, and especially here towards the southern end, and encountered lots of Greek peoples over time, they are now expanding into areas where there are other aggressive empires who are also controlling areas and trade networks. And the Romans are now getting out to the point where they have now included within their empire, or what, not empire yet, but they're included into the republic that's made up of lots of different groups. They are now moving on to a group that is going to be called the Carthaginians. All right? Now, the Carthaginians, we encountered them earlier. These are the descendants of the Phoenicians, those people who had given us the basic characters of the English alphabet and who had originally been on the coastline of what you know as modern-day Lebanon, and their major city there was Byblos, right? And now those people had left and done colonization centuries before, and Carthage is the big empire that they now run, and these are the descendants of the Phoenicians. And this group is a large trade empire. It's very powerful in the Mediterranean, and it is having a lot of economic interests around where Rome is aggressively expanding, and it seems sort of inevitable by geography that they are going to come into conflict with each other. And this is going to lead to what's called the First Punic War, and essentially the Punic War between the Romans and Carthage will mostly be based on who is going to control the island of Sicily, which is a very wealthy area with a lot of commerce and a lot of agricultural production as well. So that's going to be the key factor in the creation and the battles that are going to be called the First Punic War. Okay? Here are the simple dates for the First Punic War, and you'll notice that they are very long. This long war is really going to challenge the way Rome operates. For example, Rome has built essentially a republic, an expanding republic, using Roman land-based military forces and military success, and then incorporating people into their new state, their new republic. Carthage is a seaborne empire with very little army at all, and when they do have an army, they usually hire mercenaries of some sort to take care of that. They are a seaborne empire. So we're almost back to that same kind of idea we had earlier with the Spartans and the Athenians in the Peloponnesian War, Sparta being a land-based military power, Athens being a naval-based one, and the warfare that results when those two kinds of states are in struggle with each other. What the Romans are going to need to do is they're going to need to find a way to get control of Sicily, and they're going to need to create a navy, right? They had to invest massive resources in training and in the construction of ships and the hierarchy and structure of the Navy. This is something new to the Romans. Some of their first attempts at building a navy go very badly. There are a huge number of casualties within the conflict between the Romans and the Carthaginians. Many of these battles, both at sea and on land, are rather costly for everyone involved. But in essence, the Romans are able to go back into their networks of all the city-states and controlling areas they have, extract more military manpower, and send it to the front either as soldiers or sailors. And they are eventually able, after a very long war that has a very costly war that is, they are eventually able to take the island of Sicily and now reap the rewards of having a large area that is going to be divided up and used as a resource for the state. The ability of the Romans to take Sicily now and control it is going to have to return something in terms of loot or taxation to make up for the war. The island of Sicily then is going to be that first kind of Roman province. It's sort of like the first, call it a colony if you want, if we're going to kind of use some short language. A colony of Rome itself that's going to be used for the extraction of resources to pay back Rome for what they've done. But another thing is also happening here. Notice how long this war is. And remember, we raised the idea that a real Roman man was one who, from the elite class, who would be able to outfit himself and serve in the military for 10 years with distinction, and then go back and assume the powers of office back in their town or their region, and go through the steps of power. In this case, think of a war that lasts over 2 decades, and that is drawing huge resources out of Rome. And the state is committing more and more resources to the military success of this campaign, and they need to invest more and more time, energy, money, and people. So if you're looking at this from one sense, and this is a transition period that many historians of Western civilization and of Rome are intrigued to investigate a question that we're not sure have the right answer, but let's ask the question anyway. Is Rome becoming sort of addicted to imperialism? Is it that the up-and-coming classes see the expansion of Rome as an opportunity, for the glory of the state, but also loot for me, prestige for me, ability for me and the male members of my family to enter into the military and get higher rank, more responsibility, have access to more power. And of course, when the civilians or areas that are conquered by the outside armies, those civilians then become subject to the new people. They could be enslaved, they could have their resources taken, they could have their land taken. So that for some, we see this idea that warfare could be seen as a way to make a living. And if that's true, if you were a soldier in the First Punic War and you've devoted basically most of your entire adult life to service in the military, the outbreak of peace, no offense, could potentially be a real threat to you and your prestige. All right? Also, a key element to think about here is that the Roman army soldier used to be drawn from the small farming class. And if you've come from a small farming background where you had some stability with your family, but now through military means have gotten to the heights of great military glory and promotions, are you going to go from the glory and the loot of the battlefield back to your humble farm? Will you sort of do what Cincinnatus had done? Serve your state, save what you needed in the state, do your duty, and go back home? Or is that myth about to be tested? We'll see. Immediately after the First Punic War is over, there's some issues back and forth about the peace treaty and whether the Carthaginians fully paid the indemnity, the money they owed Rome for the war. And then what Rome does is it seizes the islands of Sardinia and Corsica and essentially are tempting the idea of another war. And it's interesting to see that because if we go back to what was just said on the previous slide, there was this temptation to take a look at war as an opportunity, not for the state necessarily, but for the individual to empower themselves and, of course, create a better legacy for them and their family, as well as more inheritance and loot. In this Second Punic War, there is going to be a very, very difficult situation for Rome. The Carthaginians had learned that the way they could defeat the Romans was on land. They were not going to be able to defeat them on the sea. They are now going to have to change strategies if they want to survive. They see Rome as a direct threat to them. Rome keeps encroaching on their areas of control and their trade routes, and they know that there will probably be no peace between the Romans and the Carthaginians. So there will be a second Punic War between Rome and Carthage that will break out in 218. So the time of peace did not last particularly long, but the aggressive nature of Roman sort of expansionism, imperium or control, imperialism if we want to start to use that word, that is what the Carthaginians are seeing. They have no illusions. In the process, having lost control of many areas, they have expanded their empire where they can, including in and around Spain, and that's where they're going to start to recruit and train a massive army that will march along the shoreline of the Mediterranean Sea and actually invade Italy. This is the era when we know of the famous Carthaginian general. His name to us is called Hannibal. Hannibal will be the one who's going to put together this massive military power and exert it. He is going to take this large army, march into the peninsula of Italy, and spend many years going up and down, destroying multiple armies of the Romans, multiple city-states, multiple cities, I should say, in different parts of the Roman Republic, really straining and stressing the Roman resources. But even though he is able to march around, he's not able to have a definitive battle that will stop the Romans. Now, for the Romans, this is a time of dire, dire issues, and they're having a very difficult time maintaining themselves. And here is why. This is a bust of Hannibal. Hannibal had, in many ways, studied everything he needed to think about how he was going to try and defeat the Romans. And part of his strategy was to go straight to the Roman heartland. That was true. But the second part, and this is the part that will fail, he was counting on a significant number of the areas conquered and controlled by the Romans earlier of turning coat and joining him. In other words, he was hoping to go into the homeland of the Romans and break down some of the alliances that the individual regions had with each other, and many of them do not. So Hannibal's strategy is not going to work. He can, in many places, destroy lots and lots of farmland. He can destroy crops. He can, stir up slave rebellions and things like that, but he cannot actually defeat the Romans, and he is going to eventually fail. Okay? What happens is the Romans figure out that they're just going to have to go straight to the heartland. So they organize an army and they just sail right across and they go straight for the city of Carthage. Instead of trying to continue the battle inside of Italy or fighting along the edges, they decide to take all their military resources, and in a battle called Zama in 202, the Romans are able to defeat the Carthaginians just outside the city of Carthage. And this is going to now be the removal of the last significant empire in the Mediterranean that could have stopped the Romans. Roman expansionism is now going to be relatively unchecked. There are still lots of people on the edges of the Roman Empire who are not particularly friends of Rome, but are also not large-scale military organized states. So as long as they do not combine, Rome is relatively safe. Now, one thing that had happened is during the Punic Wars, some of the Greek city-states of what you know as modern-day Greece and of Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, they had in many ways started participating in the war against Rome. And much like we had seen earlier with the Persian Empire, once the Romans recognize that their enemy, the Carthaginians, have some alliances and friends, they're eventually going to spread so that the Romans in the next wave of expansionism will take over much of Greece and into the area of what you know as Asia Minor or Turkey. There is a final Punic War in the next century. It lasts very short. It's only about 3 years. By this point, Carthage has been reduced down to just kind of a city-state with a trade network, but really no military resources. It defies Rome, and the Roman army comes in and destroys it. And not only destroys it, razed it. And what we mean by that is absolute destruction. Totally knocked down the city and destroyed it. And you'll see that the city that once was the greatest challenge of the greatest empire to the Romans has now, through 3 wars, been reduced down to essentially an archaeological site. Be sure to take a look through your work inside the different books that you're accessing to get an understanding of the Punic Wars. And then, of course, the sample questions will also assist you in understanding this key area of Roman development.